This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/JavaScript Jabber. Hey everybody, and welcome to another JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have Aimee Knight.
Hello from Nashville, Tennessee.
Joe Eames.
Hey everybody.
AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming to live from Provo.
And we have Cory kind of doing double duty today. Cory House.
Hi there, everybody. Coming at you from icy Kansas City.
Nice. Yeah, it snowed here. I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. Yeah, here near Salt Lake City. So anyway, we scheduled this episode. It's kind of timely, actually. It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes down. But Cory asked if we could do an episode on React, the big picture. And he has a course on Pluralsight, which I watched, and that cleared up some things that I'd been wondering about with React. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive in really quickly. Cory, do you want to kind of introduce the topic as far as what React, the big picture, encompasses and what it doesn't?
Yeah, as far as our conversation for today, I'd say that there are 3 core things that we can talk about, which is one, which is why React. 2, which is perhaps more interesting, is why not React. And then right in the middle, which is also an interesting conversation, is the trade-offs that one has to expect when they choose React, or that they have to accept, I should say, because there are, with any technology, some good and some bad that you take along with it.
Wait, what? That's crazy talk.
Trade-offs. We don't do that as developers.
Yeah, no, there's the right way and then there's everybody else's way.
This is going to be a fun show.
Yep. So Angular and then everybody else. Is that what I heard, Joe?
No, you did not hear that from me.
Talking about 2018.
No, you did not hear that from me.
Yeah. Well, and I think the framework war has kind of, I don't know. I mean, I still hear people arguing about which framework to use, but for the most part, I think people.
Spoiler alert.
What?
Spoiler alert! It's Backbone.
It's Backbone. Yeah. Generally, though, most people have accepted that. You know what? I like using whatever framework I use, and I understand why you like using whatever framework you use. And the other thing that's nice is that one framework will invent something, and then another framework will say, hey, that's a great idea, and they'll incorporate the parts of it that they like. So
do you really feel like most people feel that way?
That's hard to say just outright. I think most of the people I talk to do, but my sampling is probably skewed a little bit.
So, Joe, I would say a lot of people enjoy what they do, but don't necessarily know what they're missing. And I think that's not necessarily a bad place to be. I mean, I will say I've deliberately avoided looking into some functional languages that I've heard people wax poetic about and that sound like a ton of fun, just because I know if I went too deep, I might find myself unhappy in my current tech stack.
That's like how I view like my diet. So I don't eat sugar and stuff because I'm like, I can't open Pandora's box.
All right. Well, diet aside, is that a healthy way to look at
sugar.
things?
Gotcha.
Well, so Joe, I mean, Chuck, you bring up a great point. I mean, the whole the whole issue of keeping yourself naive just for the sake of contentment, that's probably a very slippery slope. Not something I'm recommending, but I am being transparent that I have done it before. Like, for instance, I spent very little time looking at F# or OCaml or Erlang or all of these interesting functional languages, because I've looked just enough to go, ooh, yeah, I could see how I'd really enjoy this, but there's no sense of me becoming an expert since I'm pretty happy in my current state. So now, given there's so much that you could learn by going into those two, so I totally suggest for people to do so, unless there's someone like me that knows once you see something that's technically clearly superior and you know it well enough that you can really use it, then you find yourself very discontent in that current area. So
Interesting.
we're off on a bit of a tangent here, but it's an interesting conversation.
This is a React episode, so, functional, like, you mean Reason ML, for example?
Sure. Yeah, and I've looked enough at Reason that I like what I see there too. But I'm not going deeper again because I know that if I really fall in love with Reason, it's going to be very hard for me to sell employers on using Reason until it reaches a certain critical mass. So we have a chicken and an egg problem
So is it
here.
about practicality?
Oh, absolutely.
Or is it about happiness, right?
Well, we should also, I feel like, make the distinction between like work and pleasure.
Well, I started getting really into Elm for a little while because it just looked awesome. And it's not a place where it's easy to find a job and get paid to do it, to work. But
yeah,
it looks pretty cool.
Is the problem maybe more that it's like, I love chocolate pie. I'm going to eat chocolate pie every day for the rest of my life. And then all of a sudden you discover strawberry pie actually isn't terrible either. And you're like, no, now I need strawberry pie. And at the end of the day, they're all 16,000 calories. Really doesn't matter which one you pick.
Yeah, AJ, you're really speaking to me, but we are a little bit time constrained, and we've already gone off on a tangent. So I'm going to push us back to the topic at hand.
React.
And,
This is such a great conversation, though. So we need to schedule this conversation.
Let's table this conversation.
No more talking about what we're talking about.
Let's talk about it when Cory hangs up so that he can't defend React anymore. I'm
There
just
we go.
kidding. I'll defend it.
This is the girl who
the
does
truth comes
React.
out.
Yeah,
I
I'll
will
defend
say,
it.
though, that having spoken with people who do a lot of different frameworks or who know they have another project coming up, a lot of people are looking at, I do Angular or Vue or, Backbone or whatever. And, for my next project, I may use something like React in order to just stay current and be able to contribute in meaningful ways. And, it's both for career reasons and for maybe the tool is a little bit better or better fitted for what I'm doing. So if somebody is looking at React as a possible option, either for career moves or for, just a different tech stack to do the next project in because Backbone isn't cutting it anymore, or you think you might be more productive with React, how do you start to evaluate that? Because that's what I got out of your course. That was the point that at least I gleaned from your course on Pluralsight.
Yeah, that was my goal, was trying as best I could to be fair about it and to recognize I think the trade-offs are the most interesting conversation to have here. And there's very clearly some trade-offs with React's model. When you think about what makes React special, people talk about how React really embraces JavaScript. Well, even that, which is one of the things that I consider a huge feature, like the fact that when I use React, the API is pretty small because it assumes expertise in modern JavaScript. Well, there's an obvious downside there because I work with developers that have mostly ES5 experience, that are comfortable with jQuery, or that have been working in Angular a lot, and they feel like the learning curve is fairly steep because they haven't had to deal with a lot of the nuances of, okay, I've got this context that wasn't what I expected here, so I ended up undefined because I didn't have to deal with binding when I was working in Angular, for instance. Things just plain worked. So there is this trade-off of React in general expects you to do a little more typing on the keyboard, be a little more explicit. It contains less, some would say less magic, or definitely less opinion. And so because of that, you find people stumbling over some of these issues that were more or less abstracted away from them in, for instance, in Angular.
See, that's my number one point. Like when newer developers ask me which framework to use, a lot of times I will say, learn JavaScript first, but I will point to React usually because I feel like it's the closest to JavaScript. So as far as newer developers, that's what I recommend because of what you just said.
Yeah, and there are some other interesting things too. I mean, so React really pushes you in the direction of having a single file per component, which is, again, something that I enjoy. I like thinking about a single file in isolation, but there's some people feel like there's a downside to that too, that you can end up with a large file that they don't like thinking in terms of having effectively their HTML and their JavaScript and essentially their styles all commingled in one file. And now this, of course, largely comes down to, are you someone who is comfortable with making that mental switch from thinking about separating concerns in terms of components rather than in terms of technologies? And this seems to be the single greatest piece of friction that I find when people look at React, because they say, all these years I've been separating concerns. I've got to think about HTML and JavaScript as separate. And in fact, React says, well, they're not actually separate concerns. Your concern is the date picker. Your concern is the time component or your text input. And because those happen to use 2 or 3 different technologies, that's really just an implementation detail. What you want is the ability to be able to think about this thing in isolation, maintain it in isolation, and that's what components give you.
Yeah, that makes sense. One other thing that I really liked about your course was that, and I can see, splitting it up or not splitting it up. Angular actually allows you to do either or. But the other thing that I liked was just that, it's like, here's React, and here's React is a very basic thing. And then it's, okay, now you can think about the ecosystem. And so just looking at all of these different pieces that you can pull together to make things work. I've found, because I've been learning React because we're doing React Roundup every week now, and I want to be conversant about the topic. And I found that, the first course is just React.js, which is very small and approachable and clean. And then, you can kind of move from there. And for learning React, having everything in the same file is actually really convenient, because I can just think about the very small problem. As I get to more complicated applications, I can definitely see trade-offs between having it all in one file and not having it all in one file. But for learning it, that particular aspect of it has been really nice, because I have this narrow focus on React.js and everything just sits in one place.
I wanted to talk about something in React that I feel like you brought up in the course, Cory, but doesn't always get the most attention, but is a huge pain point for now, granted, I'm not as ingrained in the Angular ecosystem as I used to be, but, from what I do know, Joe, you could speak to this more maybe, but the upgrades, even on Angular, not AngularJS, I feel like, from what I've heard, are still very painful. And so, you pointed out with React, they have code mods. And so I kind of 2 questions. The first question, for Joe, is that the case that it is still pretty painful just within Angular, not AngularJS? And then for Cory, my question is, are the code mods as wonderful as they sound?
So if you're talking about the upgrades on the new version of Angular, when they release when they go from 4 to 5 or 5 to 6, etc. No, those ones, so far as my experience has been, and everybody that I've talked to has been, that that's super, super, super straightforward. Very rarely you might have a small problem with this or that, but they have very few breaking changes, and so for the most part, it's a tiny thing. Now, granted, I haven't myself dealt with a 500,000 line application, but the Angular team has, and they've dealt with a lot of clients who have, and they've said in all cases they've never had clients report, or almost never report, that they had any significant amount of efforts to get there.
That matches with my experience as well. Upgrading from one to another.
If you're looking at
pretty minor.
The upgrading from AngularJS to Angular.
I was not talking about that. That's a whole nother beast. That's one framework to another framework.
Right. Yeah, I don't know that much about the React world. So is React...
Is there an automated way to do that in Angular, though? Or is that something that only React offers right now?
No, it's just React that has those code mods.
Okay. So then I guess my question for Cory is, are these as wonderful as they sound, or are you going to run into problems?
Well,
Please be honest with us.
So I'll be very honest. The code mods are not a panacea, because in a real application, you're not running merely React. You tend to be running all these other libraries too. And in fact, to give you an idea of how out of hand this can get, our corporate framework for working with React contains 104 NPM packages as of today. So there's a very big reason that my team is a centralized team, that effectively it's our job to corral all those NPM packages together into something that's cohesive and works, because every few weeks, one of those will make a breaking change that causes a rippling change through the rest of that graph. So code mods don't solve that problem. When I think about, that's one of the really nice things about things like Ember, things like Angular, is having this cohesive framework means that you don't have this pain of wrangling different JavaScript libraries together. Now, things like Create React App have come a long way to help with this. But what I'm finding is Create React App, of course, doesn't contain everything that we want. So we find ourselves, many teams will fork Create React App and then add their own changes in. So that sort of, that reduces the pain of all of this greatly. So when I say that we have 100 and some odd packages to wrangle, we let Create React App solve most of those because we just pull in their stuff and then we have to just deal with our extras. Because if you ejected, for instance, Create React App, which for those that don't know, that's Facebook's recommended and official starter kit for, or boilerplate as you might call it, for building React apps. But if you eject it, you'll find that there are dozens and dozens of packages in there. So it's not that we've grossly bloated it, but we definitely have a lot more packages in real applications than what's just there. Now, as far as your question of code mods, for those that don't know, code mods are a way to run a command line app that will automatically update your code to the latest version of React. And this actually does work very, very well. And there's a good reason that it does, because you look at Facebook today, they have, at last count, I heard 40,000 plus React components in production at Facebook. So if React makes a breaking change, they have to automate it. There's no practical way to go in and update all these things by hand. So the code mods really do have to be reliable and work quite well. And in my experience, yeah, that's not a pain point for me. They've got that slam dunked. It's the maintaining all the other libraries that caused me to build a JavaScript app today that's painful.
I imagine like the smaller API too for React makes that also possible to be easier.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So it sounds,
I can keep going with questions. Or does somebody else go?
Well, you mentioned opinion. What's the word? Opinionatedness. I hate making up English words. Anyway, but Angular's fairly opinionated, right? I mean, you look at Angular one way or the other, and a lot of the stuff's gonna look pretty similar. And I keep bringing up Angular because that's where the majority of my experience with the front end frameworks come in. I'm not trying to say one's better than the other or anything, but yeah. So given that experience, React, it seems really kind of freeform and nebulous. There are some things that people have settled on, maybe MobX or Redux or, some of these other patterns and tools out there. But it seems like it's pretty free form. And in a lot of ways, it's a lot easier to figure out what you're supposed to be doing if it's opinionated. So do you find that the lack of opinionated approach in React is a hindrance sometimes? Or is it mostly a help because you can kind of build your stack for whatever you need?
Yeah, so I think that is like a lot of other conversations in technology where there's a group of people that prefer to go choose very focused tools, pull them off the shelf, compose them together, and build something that is lean and focused on exactly their issue. And those sorts of developers are often, you think about the Unix community, you think about people that will pipe commands together. And all those commands are little single purpose, do one thing well tools, and you could pipe all those tools together to do something powerful. But of course, they're not particularly friendly to people just coming in because it's unclear how to compose all these things together. And that same thing happens in React. One thing that I notice is React has a variety of great tools out there. Redux, for instance, is very, very popular. But Redux also tends to be overused. And in fact, the creator of Redux, Dan Abramov, has even spoken to this before many times, that people tend to reach for it immediately because they think if I'm not using it, then I'm not being enterprise grade or professional or whatever it may be. Or we learn one way to do things and then we try to use that everywhere. So yeah, it's a blessing and a curse again, because part of when you talk about expertise in any kind of technology, expertise comes from making mistakes. And the mistake that people tend to make in React is they look at the React ecosystem, they go, well, this Redux thing is really popular, so I guess I need to use it. Well, everybody's talking about MobX, so maybe I should try that instead. And so we end up pulling in these things before we actually need them. And in many cases, I've found they were never necessary at all, that on smaller applications, that really the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So there is a trade-off here in terms of power to make exactly what you want, but also responsibility for selecting the right tools. And that's precisely where, having somebody senior on your team that at least has a little bit of scar tissue or enough understanding of these tools to recognize when they're useful, that's really helpful in React. And in fact, you look at how my team's job at Cox Automotive is to try to get everybody to use React in a more consistent way so that we can share components, because React itself just doesn't have enough opinion in there to assure that we all can interact with each other. For the very least, we have to run on the same version, but there's other little nuances there where it's helpful to have the same thing. So having someone in your company that's on the hook for making these decisions and enforcing the opinions as much as they can programmatically is really useful in React, because it is so flexible and so unopinionated.
So you talked a little bit about, taking and picking specific tools that are optimized to do an exact job, right? I was just curious if you had an opinion in your experience on how often that turns out that people actually do that and end up with more optimized tools, and how often this just, like you kind of said with Redux, they just choose whatever the default choice is, and then they end up with just whatever they get, and the optimization ability doesn't actually turn out to be a benefit to them.
Well, so I do find it interesting. Human nature is we tend to be pack animals, and we see everybody doing something, and then there's this social proof that we go, okay, once I see 50% of people are choosing this, I probably should too. I don't want to end up being the oddball that chose the losing piece of software, whatever that may be. So yes, that causes people to end up reaching for something perhaps for the wrong reasons. But on the same token, I do find it very interesting. There is a significant portion of React developers that use MobX instead of Redux, or that use all sorts of alternatives to those two libraries that are out there. There continues to be a lot of innovation there, and a significant minority that are using these other libraries. So that benefit of being able to just say, here's a component library and you can attach all these other things to it, I think is a lot of what's fostered the innovation within the React community, because we have so much freedom to be able to add these different things. But yeah, you're right. That doesn't necessarily mean that people are doing a good job selecting what would make their particular application lightest and fastest and easiest to maintain. Because that's a hard thing to figure out, especially up front at the beginning. And that's why I recommend to people, just use plain React. Start out there, and when you feel pain, then start looking at Redux or MobX or all these alternatives.
That makes sense. So when wouldn't you want to use React then?
Well, so there's a couple things. If you have a team that is new to JavaScript, React is a pretty intimidating thing to pick up, because what I find myself doing, and I've just this last week, I've been meeting with a team that is in that situation, and I found myself spending days going through JavaScript and going through the modern features that have come up in the last few years, and you start to realize, wow, there's a lot of surface area to cover, because JavaScript's well over a decade old, and we keep glomming on new features. ES6 was huge, and then ES7, ES8, they march along, and we continue to get good stuff. So there, in some ways, people say React is easy to learn because the API is small. Well, yeah, but you really do need to master JavaScript, and you need to understand all these modern features in a way that you probably don't necessarily have to do if you were using alternatives like Vue or Angular or probably Ember either. I think those seek to abstract some of that away from you. So they may be more attractive for people that are not as senior in JavaScript. But I don't know, Joe, do you feel like that's a fair statement?
This episode is sponsored by Kendo UI. Kendo UI allows you to build better apps faster. They have a comprehensive library ranging from data grids and charts to buttons and sliders. Plus, you can use their components as plain JavaScript as well as in Angular, React, and Vue. They have a large collection of customizable popular themes like Bootstrap and Material. Go check them out at javascriptjabber.com/KendoUI.
Which statement specifically are you asking me is fair? You made a few.
Well, yeah, I did make a few. Well, the statement that I'm making is I feel like Angular, for instance, puts less pressure on somebody to be a master at JavaScript because Angular, to some degree, provides templates that effectively, if you really understand Angular's take on how to write good templates and how to write their component structure, you don't have to be a master at JavaScript to be really successful in Angular.
I think that is definitely a fair statement, with, again, the natural caveat that if you do learn JavaScript really well, then or if you do learn React, you're going to benefit from being forced to learn JavaScript better, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
It is, yes, I guess I'd say that's definitely a benefit. There is some. It's an abstraction layer. It's an interesting and weird abstraction layer. Those the ng-ifs and the ng-fors, and in Vue they have their own versions of those. It's interesting, those abstraction layers that they actually have, right? They have those abstraction layers, and yeah, they do make some of the rough edges of JavaScript a little bit better and easier. Does that what does that mean in the long run? That's a hard statement to make. It's not about is it good now. It's what does it mean in the long run? And do we really need to learn JavaScript a lot better? That most people would say yes. I'd probably be one of those that said yes. So if you're going to do one of those other ones, you better not ignore your JavaScript.
Yeah, I mean, when I learned Rails, I didn't even realize that I was learning Ruby concepts at the same time. And then later on, I realized, oh, the way that they do, for example, inheritance for models, turns out that's just class inheritance in Ruby. And, and then there are all these other things that kind of come out of that. And so it's interesting, I feel the same way about Angular and TypeScript, where, I just kind of follow the Angular way. And then eventually it's like, oh, I see what's going on here with TypeScript.
I'm going to make an observation here, too. So as someone who is still, I like to say, relatively new to the industry, I think it is I feel like it is a little bit less on which is more JavaScript and which is more like API focused. And I think it's more about if you are on a team with a lot of senior developers and that team is used to programming in a functional way, they're going to like React and they're probably going to hate Angular. If you are on a team with a lot of senior developers and they like doing things in a more object-oriented way, they are probably going to love Angular and hate React. So, and I don't mean to call out senior developers, but I feel like the more you're in the industry, the stronger your opinions become. And from a business perspective, you probably should weigh into just what the developers like to use, because they're going to be more productive in a tool they like.
That's a fantastic point. You could simplify it just a little bit more and just say, if your team has a strong preference, you better have a really good reason to go against your team's preference.
But I will say, but for juniors on your team, they're probably just happy to do anything.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, our local dev coding school, they're teaching React now. They're not teaching Angular.
That is true. I've seen that here as well.
Now, I will say that when I have a really close friend that just graduated in June, and he went out there to go get a job, and he's like, crap, I really wish they taught me Angular because all the jobs were in Angular. But still, they felt like it was just as easy to teach React as it was to teach Angular. So, and that's their job, is to educate people.
Yep.
And I would say, as an educator, I don't disagree with what their decision was either. I don't feel one is significantly harder to teach than another.
So that's where I think
I'm going to chime in real quick because I think Cory needs to bow out, and I want him to kind of just, make any point he needs to make before he goes.
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah. So sorry, I will say, Joe, real quick to your question. I think the other big question that anyone has to ask is, are you somebody that prefers libraries or prefers frameworks? And are you in a company that can live with the unopinionated nature of a library like React? Are you a team that can rally around it and come to your own opinions and then encapsulate those somehow? Because Create React App only takes you most of the way across the river. And then there's probably some other things you'll want to add in. So those are some other decisions there. I'll let you guys continue to have the conversation. I'm sorry I have a conflict I got to run for, but I've no doubt you'll have plenty to talk about.
Yeah.
So have a great day, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Cory.
So this is where I kind of think Vue shines, because it's kind of like a happy medium. So if you have a team of senior developers who are a little of both, then maybe you go with Vue because it's going to have a little bit of each. And like with Vue, like with Vuex, you can kind of, it's mutable, but you still have kind of some of those like Redux concepts.
Yeah, the thing I see with Vue is it feels to me, kind of a mix of Angular JS or Angular 1 and React. And the unopinionated stuff is definitely there. It just seems like a lot of the third-party stuff that you would pull in that would be a Redux or a router, because React has React Router, which is not maintained by the React team. What I see is that a lot of that stuff is actually provided by the Vue team. You just don't pull it in until you need it. And so it's kind of a weird hybrid of the two, because you can pick and choose, but you're probably picking and choosing stuff that was written by the core team.
I think that's a very nice strategy to have something that's opinionated, but that has libraries. So, you can pick and choose, but you can pick and choose the thing that's likely to work well and to be designed well.
I like it when people call Vue the Angular 2 that should have been. Not that I personally have that opinion, but I definitely see it that Vue is like this strange next evolution of Angular JS. And you kind of hinted at that, Chuck.
There's a lot of truth to that, because I feel like more often than not, I see people who are on Angular JS and they want to do something newer, and I see most of the time people going to Vue instead of Angular.
So when they were coming out with Angular 2 and they were making the announcements about how they were separating the concerns, they were getting rid of the complexity, they were making it smaller and lighter, like in my mind's eye, I was like imagining what Vue is. I was like, yes! And then when I actually saw the first demo of it, I was like jaw dropped. Why? And just tears streaming down my emoji face.
Really? You were disappointed by Vue, huh?
No, Angular 2.
Oh, sorry, Angular 2. Oh, my bad.
No, I thought Vue was great. So when when the Googlers were talking about what Angular 2 was going to be, it was resonating with my frustrations with Angular. They're like, we're going to decouple it, we're going to blah, blah, blah. And so in my mind, what they were describing was Vue. So when I saw Angular 2, I was like, this is not what I was imagining. This is not the future I was promised. This is more complicated.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation there too, but also a conversation for another day if we're focused on React and its ecosystem. But I've heard that sentiment expressed by more than just you, AJ. So
my sentiments are a virus. They infect everyone.
Yeah.
So back to React, the big picture.
React, the tangent maker.
React, the tangent maker. Yeah, like this is definitely not the conversation I thought we were going to have when we were talking about React, the big picture. They're going to talk about what is the current big, overall picture of React, not.
So I want to make like another point and hear your guys' thoughts on this. So we talked about this on the Front End Happy Hour podcast at NG Atlanta. Do you guys see that it seems to be more startups will choose React and more like enterprise companies go towards Angular? And if so, why do you think that is?
I think we're seeing a bit of that, but I'm not sure if that's because that's reality or that's just because React is super popular in the city of San Francisco, and the startups there are like, there's 10 startups in San Francisco for every developer. I think each developer is involved in 6 of their own startups and 3 that their buddy did. And
so I do see that, like, granted, Nashville is not San Francisco, but Nashville is an interesting mix as far as the developer community here, because there are a lot of enterprise companies that have, like, there's a lot of companies that have been around, like HCA is a huge healthcare organization here. Now, I don't know what they're using, but there's also like a strong .NET community here. And so I see those people usually on the Angular side, but there are also like a number of startups here as well. And I have friends too that live like in Chattanooga and Knoxville, and like startups there seem to go the React route. So it's definitely, I think Simona, I may mispronounce her last name. Thank you. She kind of made that point, and I think there was a lot of truth to it.
So there's a very interesting survey done by Stack Overflow where they showed that most cities have a fairly even mix of React and Angular versus each other. There's obviously they all do other things as well, but he was looking at least those 2 are on the chart, except for San Francisco and Brooklyn, which were primarily React. And then there was a couple of cities which were heavily Angular. But he said, I consider these to be extremely trendy cities. So this doesn't surprise me, React being kind of the new hotness. But they were really, really popular in San Francisco and in Brooklyn. React was.
I can't believe that they are so last quarter. They're not even on Vue yet.
Well, when it comes to paying jobs, there are very few people in the U.S. yet that are on Vue.
But I guess, like, given kind of the stuff that Cory pointed out, do you think that any of that correlates to what we see, or not necessarily?
I think
like could it be that like enterprises move slower, so they're okay with something, like the JavaScript ecosystem moving a lot faster, and you really have to like keep up with JavaScript if you're going to do React, and startups usually are moving a little faster, whereas like enterprise companies, they might be okay with sitting even on AngularJS.
So I've worked at companies that pretty much dictated the tech stack, and I've worked at companies that didn't. It was just whatever the team really wanted to use. And I think that's really what a lot of this is going to come down to. It's not going to be so much enterprise or whatever. I think it's going to be the companies that want to stick with the stack they have for a while. If they're already using Angular, they'll continue to use Angular. And then there are going to be other companies that just allow their development teams to do what they feel like they want or need to do. And I don't know if there's going to be a strong correlation one way or the other that one type of company is going to be one or the other. So I think it's an interesting question to ask, but I don't know if the distinction of enterprise or non-enterprise, whatever that means, is necessarily a helpful distinction as far as who's going to be using what and why. I think it really just comes down to the companies and who they can attract and what they think the trade-offs are for them.
Right. That's good point.
But I could be wrong. It's entirely possible, but that makes sense. Yeah.
Our conversation seems to have stagnated without Cory.
Yep. Anyway, if you want to try out React, I think it's definitely something worth looking at, both, for mobility in your career as well as just, to see how other folks do it.
One other point, you should check out anything for mobility in your career, just about. Yeah.
One other point that I really want to make here, though, because it was, there was the point made basically where the bootcamp taught React and then all the jobs were Angular. A lot of the concepts between the two frameworks, so components and, setting up classes and the way that things go together, it's not JSX, but a lot of the rest of these concepts, I see a lot of similarities between the three frameworks that we've kind of been talking about, people having the option to move to. And so if you're looking at any of them to learn and you're just, tied up inside, oh, well, what if I go and start learning React and then Vue just takes off? You won't be left in the dust. Those skills will transfer. You'll have to go learn the Vue way of doing some things, but, don't let it stop you that there are options. Just go pick one. If you have a friend that's really great at one and not the other, then, that's probably a good option because you can get help. If you seem to really just, something about React or Vue or Angular really appeals to you, go with that one. As far as just starting out, I don't think you can go wrong learning any one of these. And then from there, figuring out, okay, where do I want to be at? Or go look at the companies you want to work for and then go with what they're using.
I want to make one more final point too. So I feel like people usually look at TypeScript and Angular and they think like, this is the match made in heaven and they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand really well. And if you are using React, you're going to you can't use TypeScript. You have to use Flow or something like that. And where I'm at, we're actually using React and TypeScript together, and I have loved it. So don't think because you go with one ecosystem that you're have to use the exact tools. I think you can intermingle the different tools together.
Gotcha. It's cool. Or good. Well said.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, I'm a TypeScript fangirl now.
Nice.
I'm a big fan of TypeScript. Have you tried ReasonML, Aimee?
I have not yet.
So I've tried Elm, which is thematically very close to it. So a big
on
fan
my
of
list,
that.
but not as high up as Rust, since I want to focus more on the back end this year. But
cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, I guess just to wrap this up, I'm going to encourage people, if you are looking at React and some of these other frameworks and trying to make one of these decisions, Cory does have his React, the Big Picture course on Pluralsight. Joe, do you know if they have an Angular, the Big Picture?
Yeah, they do. In fact,
are you the author? Did I ask a really?
I am the
question?
author. You did. I am the author of that. So Pluralsight has both Angular, the Big Picture, Angular JS, the Big Picture, which is a little dated now, and then now Cory's React, the Big Picture. He and I put out our Big Picture courses on Angular and React roughly at the same time, but within a month of each other. So they have those. And, it's also a good idea to chip in as well that if you are looking for looking at various different front-end frameworks, then there's a Framework Summit conference that's going to be happening this October. It's going to be talking about a lot of different front-end frameworks. So there's also
that is an awesome idea. Looks very cool.
Yeah, I'm excited about that one. We talked about it on Adventures in Angular. We'll put a link to that episode in the show notes.
Yeah, we definitely have to do a show on here about that.
Yeah, we should. We definitely should. All right, well, let's go ahead and do some picks. This episode is sponsored by Codacy. If you want to improve code quality, prevent bugs, and secure liabilities for making it into your production, and at the same time speed up your code review process by 20%, then you need to try Codacy. Codacy makes it easy to track code quality and code coverage, and to identify and fix issues by automatically checking your commits and pull requests against all the most widely used static analysis tools. Codacy helps build great teams that build great software, so join companies like Delivery Hero, PayPal, Samsung, and more, and try it for free through GitHub or Bitbucket. If you use the code JSJabber at checkout, you will get a 10% discount. That's Codacy, CODACY.com. AJ, do you have some picks for us?
Well, I didn't read any new books this week, so I don't have too much to report. But if anybody's interested in learning about what I am doing next, now that Damply's done for me, the website to check out is peoplewink.com, PPL wink as in WINK.com. There's actually nothing up there right now, but there will be by the time this airs. And yeah, that's all.
Nice.
Awesome.
Aimee, what are your picks?
Okay. I realize that I haven't had any health ones in a while. I'm going to have to fix that soon, but I don't have any this week again. But the first one I have, so I am very much a perfectionist, and while it's good in a lot of ways, it was also something that when I first got into programming and when I got my first job, I realized how much of a perfectionist I was and how much I needed to let go of that. in a lot of cases. And so it's a really short post, but I thought it was beneficial and like a good reminder for anybody else like this. It's just called Why Being a Perfectionist is an Obstacle and How to Beat It. And it basically just talks about like giving yourself constraints and like giving yourself deadlines as a perfectionist and why deadlines are really good. So that's my first pick. And then the second pick, this is from a couple weeks ago, but it was just a thread on Hacker News. How do you understand the large code base of an open source project? And so I think this is really beneficial to read through a lot of these comments, not just for open source, but especially for like newer developers. One of the biggest challenges for me at my very first job was like trying to understand this massive code base of like, multiple APIs and ETLs and UI and just being very overwhelmed. So all the little tidbits in here, I think are going to be super helpful for anybody in that situation. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Joe, what are your picks?
So I've just got one pick. I've recently started playing this game with my wife called Marital Bliss. It's a card game, and it's not like your typical card game that you might think of. It's actually a card game about being a good spouse. And so you actually make points by doing things for your spouse using this game. It's been pretty interesting. We just barely started playing, and it's just kind of a really cool idea of kind of gamifying being a good spouse and doing nice things for your spouse and taking care of them and speaking their love language, that sort of thing.
Very cool.
That's my pick. Called Marital Bliss card game.
I'll have to check that out. I'm kind of an idiot sometimes that way. So I'm going to jump in here with a couple of picks. So one is it's this TV show that my wife started watching, and she got me watching it. I've really been enjoying it. It's not historical, but it's kind of a historical show. It's called Hunting Hitler, and basically the premise of the show is that in 2014, an executive order declassified a whole bunch of files that basically showed that the FBI was trying to track down Hitler after he was presumed dead. And so the idea is that, okay, could he have escaped? How would he have escaped? What are the, where would he have gone? What evidence is there that he actually died in the bunker that, they say he committed suicide in? And anyway, it's been really, really interesting to watch. I know that there are some cultural and other feelings about World War II and Adolf Hitler, and I'm not condoning any actions taken by the Nazis, but at the same time, I mean, it's really just fascinating to see, okay, the kind of the what ifs and who might have been involved with what with a lot of this stuff. So anyway, Hunting Hitler, it's done by the History Channel, and like I said, just fascinating. So I've been enjoying that. And then I think it might have been last week, Joe picked The Greatest Showman, and it might have been on Adventures in Angular, and it never got picked on this show. I don't remember. But I've been listening to the soundtrack, and I love it. I absolutely love it. It's a terrific show. But more than that, my daughter and I went and saw the sing-along version on Saturday, and so we sang along with it, and that was a ton of fun. And so I'm going to pick the sing-along.
Where are they doing the sing-along version at?
We went and saw it at the Megaplex in Lehigh.
Huh.
But
I've actually been looking for that to go and.
I think they're only doing it on the weekend. That's where we saw it, was on Saturday, and then on Monday because it was a federal holiday here in the U.S. But yeah, it was awesome. And so, of course, I did everything I could to embarrass my daughter while singing out at the movie. So anyway, and I'm hoping that when they release the Blu-ray, that they release the Blu-ray with the sing-along version on it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so those are my picks. And I guess that's all we got. So we'll wrap this up. Oh, two quick reminders. React Dev Summit tickets are on sale. The conference is going to be at the end of March, so check that out. And I think Cory said he was going to be speaking, and there are probably a few other people that I need to poke to get them on there. But we have Kent C. Dodds and Nader Dabbit and a bunch of other folks coming to speak. And we also have a new podcast, so React Roundup. By the time this releases, episode 1 should be out. We're releasing that on the 6th of March. And so, yeah, definitely check that out. The panelists are Cory, Nader, Kent, who I already mentioned, and Tara Minixic from Progress, Kendo UI. So definitely check that out, too. All right, well, I guess that's it. We'll go ahead and wrap up, and we'll catch you all next week.
Bye.
Laters.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.